The afternoon in Seoul progressed like any other, amidst the mirrored buildings and air-conditioned rooms, where time was measured by deadlines, and footsteps echoed important decisions in well-lit corridors. On the 15th floor of the Park and Lee Corporation, however, the mood was different. The activity wasn't about a crisis, nor an emergency meeting, but about something that, in that universe, seemed even more symbolic: the official company photo opportunity. It was the day when appearances spoke louder than reports, and each employee vied with small gestures and big smiles for a place at the center of the image that would grace internal magazines, marketing campaigns, and awards panels. Soo-jin clutched a sheaf of documents tightly, aware that the paper didn't make her any less invisible. Her simple tailored ensemble clashed with the glitter of the silk dresses, the designer watches, and the makeup perfectly aligned with the standards of that corporate elite. As she tried to approach the group gathered for the photo, she was subtly pushed back, not with explicit violence, but with silent elbows and closed smiles that said, "You don't belong here." Every attempt at inclusion was thwarted by glares that reminded her of her position. As the photographer announced the first flash, someone whispered nearby, "This will ruin the company's aesthetic." The words weren't spoken with anger, but with the coldness of someone who believes they have the right to decide, who deserves to be seen. Soo-jin felt her chest tighten, her eyes sting, but she forced a restrained smile and took 2 steps back, trying to disappear from the lens that was never aimed at her. However, from the corner of the room, a gaze followed her. A silent man, whose presence went unnoticed by everyone, observed not only the injustice, but also the quiet strength of those who choose to resist in the midst of exclusion. In that moment, something inside him stirred, and without saying a word, he decided that this scene would still have a second chance. If this scene touched you in any way, take advantage and subscribe to the channel, and leave a like so you don't miss what comes next in this story. Soo-jin had never asked for privileges, nor dreamed of being treated as someone special within those cold marble walls. For her, it was enough to be recognized for the silent effort she put into each task. The daughter of a cleaning lady who dedicated her life to cleaning offices similar to this one, she grew up learning that dignity didn't come from surnames or titles, but from honesty and perseverance. Yet, from the first day she joined that company, the mark of her origins seemed to cling to her skin like a shadow she couldn't shake. At 25, Soo-jin was logging endless hours in roles that went far beyond her official description. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, editing reports in the wee hours of the morning, erasing errors that weren't hers, and resolving crises no one else dared to acknowledge. However, every achievement was swallowed by silence. There was never praise, never recognition. On the contrary, with every step she took, she seemed to carry the burden of constantly proving she deserved to be there. Her colleagues saw her as an outsider, someone who clashed with the elitist image the company cultivated. Her simple clothes and worn shoes drew ironic glances. Even her improvised lunch, made with homemade lunchboxes, became a source of whispers. But behind this modest exterior lay a strong heart, determined not to let the arrogance of others extinguish her spark. That morning, as she held the papers for the meeting, Soo-jin remembered her mother's words, which she had said to her before she passed away. "It doesn't matter what they think, daughter. A person's worth is not measured by the way others look at them, but by the courage to stand up." These memories were the fuel that kept her going even when the world seemed to push her out of every photograph, every space, every opportunity. As crushing as the weight was, within her lay a fragile but persistent hope that one day someone would see beyond the surface. Someone who could see not just the quiet employee relegated to the background, but the woman of character, dreams, and scars that shaped her strength. And in that instant, as she swallowed once again the feeling of not belonging, Soo-jin had no idea that there was already a watchful eye on her, observing not only her pain, but also the silent strength she tried to hide. A look that would soon break the cycle of silence and transform her life into something she would never have dared to imagine. Among the many glances that met in that room, there was one in particular that carried not only contempt, but also the calculated coldness of someone who knew how to manipulate situations to their advantage. Min-seo, a department manager and daughter of one of the company's biggest investors, was the perfect portrait of the elite who believed themselves above all. With her impeccably styled hair, flawless makeup, and a smile that hid venom, she moved among the employees as if she truly owned the place. Her voice didn't need to be loud. A whispered order was enough for everyone to bow to her will. Min-seo couldn't stand Soo-jin's presence. It was inconceivable to her that someone of humble origins would occupy even the smallest space in an environment she considered exclusive to people like her, wealthy, influential, and surrounded by privilege. Every time she saw the young woman with her modest clothes and humble demeanor, a pang of unease grew in her chest, as if Soo-jin's mere existence threatened the image the company worked so hard to maintain. On the day of the official photo shoot, Min-seo saw the perfect opportunity to reassert her dominance. She approached the photographer with a polite yet intent expression and murmured sharply, "Don't include her. This image represents the strength of the company. We don't need someone who clashes." The photographer, not daring to contradict someone so influential, just nodded silently, adjusting the lens to avoid framing Soo-jin. The gesture seemed small, almost imperceptible, but its impact was devastating. In everyone's eyes, Min-seo only reinforced what many already thought, that Soo-jin didn't belong in that portrait. The awkwardness intensified, and the young woman felt her legs weaken as she realized that even the flashbulbs were conspiring against her. Meanwhile, Min-seo smiled discreetly, pleased with the exclusion. For her, this wasn't just about a photo, but about reaffirming the distance between their worlds. Hers, of luxury and status, and Soo-jin's, of simplicity and invisibility. Deep down, her obsession with humiliating the young woman hid something deeper, the fear that Soo-jin's purity might win over the eyes she believed she already had. And among all these gazes, there was one in particular that Min-seo didn't realize was paying attention to every detail. A gaze that remained silent, but carried a power that would soon shatter her false sense of control. At the back of that room, filled with vanity and appearances, there was a presence that didn't need to impose itself with grand gestures to be noticed. Kang Dae-hyun, the company's CEO, remained silent, seated in a discreet armchair, observing every detail with the calm of someone who knew his word could change the course of any decision. At 32, he carried with him not only the weight of the title of the corporation's top leader, but also the legacy of a powerful family, known throughout South Korea for the empire built over decades. His features were firm, his gaze penetrating, and even when he said nothing, the entire room seemed to sense his presence. As the flashbulbs popped and the rehearsed laughter echoed, Dae-hyun's eyes weren't fixed on the group posing for the photo, but on the isolated figure in the background, trying to hide from the humiliation. Soo-jin. He watched her intently, as if he could hear the thoughts she was trying to suppress, as if he could see beyond her humble appearance, piercing the layers of silence she had constructed to protect herself. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed her. Ever since she joined the company, there was something about Soo-jin that caught his attention, not because of the way she dressed or her position, but because of the way she faced each day. Even invisible to most, there was a quiet dignity about her, a strength that seemed to shine through just when everyone else tried to suppress it. Dae-hyun had learned throughout his life to read looks and intentions. He could recognize flatterers, opportunists, and false smiles, having lived with them since childhood. And perhaps that's why Soo-jin's almost naive sincerity intrigued him so intensely. In that moment, seeing her removed from the photograph that would represent the company's pride and joy, something inside him stirred. It wasn't just indignation. It was as if he were witnessing an injustice that echoed in his old memories from his own youth, when he'd been judged for carrying the weight of a surname everyone feared. Despite being born with a silver spoon in his mouth, Dae-hyun knew what it was like to be used, manipulated, and placed in places he didn't want to be. Seeing Soo-jin being pushed out of the portrait made him revisit pains he'd kept hidden. Like wounds that never fully healed, the directors, busy maintaining their perfect smiles for the photo, were oblivious to the CEO's watchful gaze. Min Seo, confident she had won once again, was also unaware that her every gesture was being scrutinized. Only Soo-jin, with teary eyes and trembling hands, seemed to feel the weight of a different gaze, one that neither condemned nor diminished her, but enveloped her in a silent promise that this story was not yet finished. Dae-hyun's silence was deafening. He didn't intervene immediately, didn't raise his voice, or demand respect at that moment. He remained motionless, waiting, because he had a conviction in his heart that the right moment to act was yet to come, and when it did, none of those who laughed today would have the strength to erase the impact of the decision he was about to make. And while the official photo was being taken, with false applause and superficial praise, the true outcome of that moment was still in suspense, held in the gaze of the man everyone admired, but few truly knew. A look that would soon break the silence and forever change the fate of everyone in that room. The photographer adjusted the camera for the last time, urging everyone to come even closer. The employees adjusted their jackets, the women straightened their expensive dresses, and the glint of jewelry reflected under the white lighting that bathed the room. It was the final moment, the shot that would seal the company's official image, to be featured in magazines, websites, and social media. But while everyone jostled for space in the frame, Soo-jin remained leaning against the side of the room, as if she were nothing more than an unwanted shadow. Her heart was pounding, not from the desire to be in the photograph, but from the pain of feeling deliberately erased. She tried to maintain her composure, clutching the papers she still carried to her chest, as if that gesture could shield her from the wave of contempt rising. Around her, the muffled sound of laughter hit her harder than any shove, and each false smile was a cruel reminder that, to others, she would never be more than an intruder. Min Seo, positioned right at the front center of the scene, couldn't hide her satisfaction. The sidelong glance she gave Soo-jin was like a seal of victory, as if silently saying, "There is no place for you here." It was the kind of look that didn't need words to hurt, because it carried with it the weight of an entire system that insisted on separating people into those who deserved to be seen and those who should remain invisible. When the first click rang out, Soo-jin felt her body tremble. There was no flash for her, no room in the portrait. The second click further reinforced the feeling of exclusion, as if each shot were a hammer hammering her absence into the company's history. Her eyes welled up, but she fought back the tears, refusing to give anyone the pleasure of watching her crumble. She took a deep breath, trying to breathe in the suffocating atmosphere, but her throat felt closed. In that brief moment, she wished she were strong enough to believe it didn't matter, that it was just a photo. Yet she knew it was much more than that. That image would be broadcast nationwide, becoming a status symbol for those gathered there. And she, once again, would be forgotten, erased, ignored. The pain came not only from exclusion, but from the confirmation that no matter how hard she tried, she would always be treated as someone on the margins. All around, applause began to ring out as the photographer concluded the session, applause that sounded like mockery. Soo-jin clutched the papers tighter to her chest, trying to convince herself she could bear it. But deep down, something inside her was beginning to silently break. And it was in this moment of painful silence that a detail went unnoticed by everyone, except the one who mattered most. At the back of the room, the CEO's eyes remained fixed on her, carrying a weight no one could have imagined. As everyone celebrated the official photo, Kang Dae-hyun saw something the others never would. The injustice transformed into an open wound before his eyes. And if until then he had remained silent, now that same silence began to transform into something much more powerful, ready to explode and change the course of that story. The room, still filled with the echoes of applause, seemed to vibrate with a rehearsed artificial energy. It was the perfect portrait of a company proud of its image, but at the same time, a distorted portrayal of a truth no one dared admit. That photograph had excluded someone who worked as hard as everyone else. While her colleagues chatted among themselves, exchanging forced compliments and shallow laughter, Soo-jin remained motionless, clutching the paper she carried, trying to convince herself that enduring the silence was the only way out. But inside her, something was breaking. It was at that moment that the sound of firm footsteps pierced the hubbub. These were no ordinary footsteps. There was a distinct weight to them, a cadence that commanded respect. Each tap against the marble floor resonated like a warning. Gradually, the voices began to quiet, and the attention that had previously been focused on the photo now shifted toward that presence. Kang Dae-hyun, the CEO, was walking toward the group. His expression was serene, but his gaze held something deeper, like a decision that had matured in silence and could now no longer be contained. The employees parted, uncertain of what he would do. It was rare for the CEO to intervene in moments like this. He usually remained silent, distant, maintaining the posture of someone observing without mingling. But that day, something different was happening. He crossed the room, ignoring the fawning smiles that appeared as he passed, and stopped before the figure everyone had decided to exclude. Soo-jin looked up in surprise. She hadn't expected anything but more indifference, but suddenly she found herself standing before him, so close she could feel the firmness of his presence. The seconds seemed to stretch, and the air grew heavy. She tried to look away, embarrassed, but was stopped by an unexpected gesture. Dae-hyun extended his hand toward her. The silence that fell was almost absolute. No one dared breathe. The most powerful man in that room, in front of all the employees and directors, was inviting with a simple gesture this invisible young woman to occupy a space that had been denied her. His voice echoed, firm, clear, and sharp as a blade. "Come with me." It was just 2 words, but they were enough to dismantle the entire social structure built within that room. The impact was immediate. Murmurs erupted among those present, incredulous glances met, and Min Seo, motionless in the center of the group, momentarily lost the confidence that always accompanied her. Soo-jin's hand trembled, but before he could hesitate, Dae-hyun held it firmly, as if sealing an irrevocable decision. The entire room watched, transfixed, as he led her back to the center, to the place that should have been hers from the beginning. It wasn't just a righting of an injustice, it was a gesture laden with meaning, a public act that broke down the invisible wall between classes, positions, and status. When Dae-hyun positioned Soo-jin beside him, everyone understood that this photograph, more than a corporate image, would become a symbol of something greater. The photographer, stunned, wasn't sure if he should capture the moment, but the CEO's firm gaze was enough as a silent command. The camera clicked like thunder, immortalizing the scene that none of those present would ever forget. Soo-jin's hand still trembled, but her heart was pounding so hard she could hear each beat echoing inside her chest. For the first time, someone had broken the cycle of exclusion and placed her front and center in front of everyone. The shame that had crushed her just minutes before now transformed into something new, a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and fear of what would come next. Because she knew, as well as anyone else in that room, that gestures like that didn't go unnoticed. And if the CEO decided to stand by her, the whole world would see her differently. Not all would be accepting. Many would be filled with hatred, envy, and contempt. Yet, in that moment, the weight of his hand holding hers felt stronger than all the invisible threats looming over her head. And what began as a silent act of resistance now became a public declaration that nothing would ever be the same again. The camera click echoed like muffled thunder, reverberating in every corner of that elegant room. For a moment, everyone remained motionless, as if time had frozen before the impossible scene that had just unfolded. The CEO, a man with an impenetrable bearing and unquestionable authority, had taken the hand of the employee. Everyone had decided to exclude and led her to the center of the photograph. The role reversal was so blatant that murmurs soon filled the air, growing like an uncontrollable wildfire. Some employees covered their mouths in shock, unable to believe what they had seen. Others exchanged nervous glances, trying to decipher whether this gesture should be interpreted as a simple act of justice or as the harbinger of something much greater. Min-seo, however, seemed the most shaken. Her expression, previously adorned with a smile of victory, now dissolved into a mixture of disbelief and suppressed fury. Her eyes flashed, and her clenched jaw betrayed the anger that was silently building. The atmosphere, previously marked by false corporate harmony, was now divided between those who tried to disguise their perplexity and those who couldn't hide their discomfort. Some, accustomed to fawning over the elite, quickly changed their posture, feigning approval, as if they had always believed Soo-jin deserved this space. Others, however, lacked this skill. Whispered comments escaped amid the hubbub. Why did he do that? What's so special about this girl? This is going to cause problems. As each face revealed different reactions, Soo-jin felt the weight of all those gazes on her. It was like being in the center of a silent courtroom where every expression judged her presence alongside the CEO. Her heart wavered between gratitude and fear, because while Dae-hyun's gesture had restored her stolen dignity, it had also exposed her to a dangerous exposure, capable of stirring resentment that could fester into something even more cruel. Dae-hyun, for his part, remained serene. His steady gaze never wavered, conveying the message that this was no passing impulse, but a conscious choice. There was no room for doubt. He had decided to take a stand, and his decision could not be questioned. Still, everyone knew that this gesture would not go without consequences. In the company's corridors, in secret shareholder meetings, and even in the gossip columns that loved to speculate about the young CEO's life, that scene would become an inevitable topic. Min-seo, taking a half step back, silently vowed that she would find a way to reverse the humiliation she had just indirectly suffered. For her, seeing Soo-jin next to Dae-hyun was more than an affront. It was a reminder that someone she considered inferior could steal her prominent position. And the mere possibility of that was intolerable. However, as tensions gathered like clouds about to break in a storm, the photographer, still stunned, adjusted his camera once more and asked for one last shot. This time, everyone lined up in silence, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The captured image was no longer just a snapshot of a company proud of its employees. It was a record of a rupture, a moment when power stepped down a notch to extend a hand to those everyone rejected. And although no one dared to speak out loud, everyone knew that that decision would have consequences that would extend far beyond the walls of that hall. Because Dae-hyun's gesture had planted a seed, and no one could predict what would blossom from there. The room, now almost sepulchral silence, seemed to breathe a different air, as if the CEO's gesture had altered not only the order of the employees, but the very atmosphere that hung between those glass and marble walls. The click of the camera had immortalized the scene, and the photographer, without even realizing it, had captured not just an image, but the beginning of a story no one would dare forget. Soo-jin stood beside Dae-hyun, feeling the firm warmth of his hand holding hers, and the sensation was both comforting and overwhelming. Never in her life had anyone made such a public gesture for her. It was as if, in a few seconds, all the years of invisibility had been shattered, replaced by an unexpected light. The young woman, who until then had always sought to hide in corners, now found herself in the center of the portrait, beside the man who represented not only power, but also respect and leadership. Her heart was pounding so hard it seemed to burst from her chest, and her still shaking hands betrayed the intensity of that moment. Dae-hyun, for his part, showed no rush to let go of Soo-jin's hand. The gesture, though simple, communicated more than any speech could convey. His eyes remained fixed on her, as if trying to convey a silent message. You belong here, and no one can deny that. For someone accustomed to observing the world coldly, that moment was different, charged with an emotion that he himself could not ignore. Meanwhile, the employees dispersed, trying to return to normalcy. Some looked away, others murmured among themselves, but everyone knew that this act would be discussed in the hallways, in closed meetings, and even at the lavish dinners where Dae-hyun's name was constantly mentioned. What no one knew, however, was what was really going through the CEO's mind when making that decision. Soo-jin, still confused, avoided looking at her colleagues. She feared encountering looks of hatred or envy, but at the same time she felt something different blossoming within her. This man, distant and almost unattainable, had broken the barrier of status and placed her at his side. A gesture that would not be forgotten, not only by her, but by all who witnessed it. The camera was turned off, and the photographer began to gather his equipment. However, the heavy silence still hung heavy, as if the true outcome hadn't yet occurred. Dae-hyun slowly released Soo-jin's hand, but before taking a step back, he leaned in discreetly and murmured softly, just so she could hear, "Don't hide anymore." The words were few, but they entered her mind like a promise, and at the same time a challenge. Soo-jin didn't know if she could believe them, but in that moment, something in her shattered, giving way to a flame that had long been dormant. As the staff left the salon, whispering, she remained motionless, trying to process everything that had happened. It was as if she'd been transported to a place where nothing made sense, yet at the same time, everything seemed inevitable. Before leaving, Dae-hyun gave her one last look. It wasn't simply a look of leadership, nor of superiority. There was something deeper, something that awakened in Soo-jin a mixture of hope and fear. Because, while that gesture had restored her dignity, on the other, it placed her in an even more vulnerable position, the center of attention of people who would do anything to see her fall. And in that moment, as she took a deep breath and tried to compose herself, Soo-jin realized the story hadn't ended with that click. In fact, it was just beginning. And each step from then on would lead her down a path fraught with risks, secrets, and revelations that could change not only her life, but also the fate of the man who had chosen to hold her hand in front of everyone. The company corridors, usually filled with hurried footsteps and conversations about reports and deadlines, that morning became a whirlwind of whispers and barely concealed glances. The official photo had already ended, but the impact of Kang Dae-hyun's gesture echoed as if it had happened seconds ago. It was impossible to ignore. Everyone was talking about the same subject, repeating the details with exaggerated versions, mixing astonishment, envy, and speculation. "Did you see Min Seo's face?" a clerk murmured, leaning against the coffee machine. "Not just her face. The CEO held that girl's hand as if she were..." She paused, as if she didn't dare finish the sentence. "As if she were someone important." Each word spread with the speed of a spark in a dry field. In less than an hour, the story had already spread through entire corridors and reached departments that hadn't even been in the photo. Some defended the gesture, saying that finally someone had had the courage to stand up to the arrogance of their superiors, but most reacted with hostility, as if Soo-jin's mere elevation were a personal affront. As Soo-jin walked through the office with her briefcase of reports, she felt the eyes prick her skin like thorns. Some held open contempt, others an uncomfortable curiosity, and still others watched her with a mixture of jealousy and resentment. Each step seemed to weigh twice as much, as if the ground had become a minefield ready to explode at any moment. Min Seo, for her part, walked with a hard expression, like a mask of ice. Inside, her wounded pride throbbed, but her ability to maintain appearances was impeccable. She responded to each employee who greeted her with a controlled smile, but a silent fury burned in her eyes. She knew she had to act, but not now. She silently planned, sketching in her mind ways to discredit Soo-jin and reverse the humiliation she had felt. Meanwhile, in a closed meeting on the 15th floor, some shareholders were already discussing the incident. Sitting around a dark wooden table, they exchanged words filled with distrust. "What does this mean for the company's image?" asked one of the older men, adjusting his glasses. "He exposed her too much," another replied, crossing his arms. "If the press finds out, rumors will start. And you know how that can tarnish the company's reputation." But not everyone agreed. Some saw the gesture as an opportunity to show humanity and closeness to employees, something that could even attract positive publicity. Still, the divisive atmosphere was evident, and for the first time, Dae-hyun's leadership was being questioned not because of his numbers, but because of a personal gesture. As the hallways bustled, Soo-jin tried to find refuge in the small room where she worked. She sat at her desk, took a deep breath, and let the papers fall onto the wooden surface. She felt as if she were surrounded by invisible walls. Even though her heart held the comforting memory of his hand holding hers, the fear of what might come next was overwhelming. Because she knew that in a place where everyone vied for power and status, being chosen by the man at the top was like becoming the target of a silent war. And yet, amidst the chaos unfolding around her, there was one detail no one noticed. Dae-hyun's gesture wasn't just impulse. There was intention. There was something hidden in his gaze that went far beyond corporate justice. Something that would soon begin to reveal itself in encounters and conversations that would change the way Soo-jin viewed her own destiny. The end of the workday brought a dense, almost suffocating atmosphere, as if the air carried the weight of everything that had been contained throughout the day. While most of the employees had already dispersed, Soo-jin remained at her desk, immersed in reports and spreadsheets that to many would seem invisible, but which, to her, represented commitment and silent dedication. Her concentration, however, was merely a frustrated attempt to silence the thoughts that repeated themselves in her mind. The memory of the unexpected touch, of Dae-hyun's firm hand on hers, and of the gaze that penetrated any emotional barrier made her heart beat wildly. It was in this moment of contained vulnerability that the sound of a new message on her cell phone interrupted her attempts to focus. It came from the board secretary with a short but meaningful sentence. The CEO wants to see you in his office. That alone was enough to shake everything inside her. She had never before been called directly by Kang Dae-hyun, and the mere fact of being summoned to the top floor of the company fueled the rumors. Each step toward the elevator felt like it carried the weight of years of insecurity. Upon reaching the top, the atmosphere seemed otherworldly. Modern artwork on the walls, windows revealing the city at night, and an elegant, almost intimidating silence. When she entered the CEO's office, she found him with his back to her, gazing at the lights of Gangnam, as if the glow outside spoke more than words. He didn't turn around immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice broke the silence with a calm firmness. He acknowledged the injustice he had witnessed and made it clear that he had acted not out of pity, but out of conviction. By handing over a report she had reviewed and highlighting an error few had noticed, he revealed that he had been observing her for much longer than she realized. And in that instant, without any acting, just with words and presence, Kang Dae-hyun started something that was beyond their control. Something that, from that moment on, could no longer be undone. The days that followed that encounter in Kang Dae-hyun's glass-enclosed office brought with them a strange sensation, as if the entire atmosphere of the company had been subtly altered. For Soo-jin, each morning became an exercise in emotional balance between the desire to go unnoticed and the constant pressure of feeling watched from all sides. The whispers in the hallways were inevitable. The looks carried judgments that were not spoken aloud, but stung just as strongly. Even so, something inside her grew stronger every time she recalled Dae-hyun's firm gaze and the way he, without raising his voice, had silenced the humiliation in front of everyone. It was in this invisible space between fear and memory that the bond between them began to form. Dae-hyun didn't create obvious situations, but he always appeared when Soo-jin most needed to breathe. He'd find her at strategic times, invite her to unexpected meetings, or simply cross her path casually. One of those nights, the building nearly empty and the air thick with exhaustion, he waited for her in the parking lot. Seeing her emerge with her arms full of documents, he simply smiled lightly and commented about her working more than she should, shouldering some of the burden without her asking for help. These encounters became a regular occurrence, and over time, the topics of conversation transcended professional boundaries. In a small cafe tucked away on the streets of Itaewon, sitting side by side, disguised by wide-brimmed hats, they exchanged confidences that went beyond the expected. Dae-hyun spoke of loneliness and responsibility, while Soo-jin, between sips of tea, recounted a childhood marked by absences and dreams too cramped to fit into the life she led. Little by little, beyond their control, something profound was building between them, a feeling that grew silently, sustained by lingering glances, careful gestures, and silences that said more than any words could ever convey. The next morning, the atmosphere at the company was different. There was something in the air that made the employees' footsteps sound more measured, as if everyone sensed that this would be a morning marked by something definitive. In the impeccably lit corridors, glances met with restrained intensity, and whispers carried more tension than any official email could convey. Soo-jin walked in silence, feeling each gaze fixate on her presence with the precision of an unspoken sentence. The main hall of the general meeting seemed even more imposing that day, not because of the space itself, but because of the anticipation pulsing between chairs and murmurs. Kang Dae-hyun took the stage with his usual serene demeanor, but there was something new in his gaze, a different weight, a decision already made, just waiting for the right moment to surface. When everyone was settled, he walked to the edge of the stage. No papers in his hands, no rehearsed speeches, just the conviction of someone who no longer intended to remain silent. Yesterday, in front of all of you, I saw something I cannot ignore. An injustice has been committed, and the choice to remain silent simply no longer seems acceptable to me. The words echoed with an impact that silenced even thoughts. Dae-hyun then revealed clearly and firmly that this wasn't just an employee left out of a photo, but someone whose dignity had been ignored for the sake of appearances. Facing the room, he added, "Soo-jin doesn't pose a threat to the company's image. She represents exactly what we should value: integrity, hard work, and humanity. And yes, she's a part of my life." The shock was immediate. Eyes met, a few directors exchanged discreet whispers, and in the background, Min Seo discreetly finished recording on her cell phone with an enigmatic smile. The battle was just beginning. And if you felt that this story touched something inside you, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. There are still many truths about to be revealed, and you won't want to miss what comes next.